Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burack of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. Each year for about 15 years now, I think it's 15 years, he produces this annual report, a review of what happened this past year, and a preview of what's coming up. He's a professor of organic chemistry at Cornell, a libertarian, a fan of the Austrian School of Economics. His articles and writings have been featured on Zero Hedge. He's been ranting on audio interviews for many years, but I was actually one of the first to interview him along with Chris Martenson at Peak Prosperity and Dimitri Kofinas at Capital Account, I think back in like 2009 or 2010. Dave Collum, thank you for joining me again.
Glad to do so. You were one of the first. I never did a Kofinas interview. One day I was scheduled to do one, and then some big global event occurred, and all of a sudden he had to back out. And then I listed who he interviewed, and I go, okay, well, I now know why I got bumped. I can't remember what it was, but it was someone way above my pay grade who we interviewed. So I always appreciated it. And it was back when interviews were rare.
Yep, I was starting, and it was actually easy to grow your YouTube channel and add 100,000 views and add subscribers. I mean, it's so much more difficult now with YouTube rigging the algorithms. We were talking before I started recording. Basically, you have to spend thousands of dollars now a month to add subscribers on YouTube because they've rigged it.
Yeah, it's not a world I'd want to be in. It's a tough one. It's battle for eyeballs must be ruthless.
Well, I think at this point, YouTube's basically like, fuck you, pay me for the growth. So
Right.
So we're recording this interview on Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. I want to get your thoughts on markets, though, and I'm using air quotes here. Do you think at this point, with the central banks, the government in DC being as corrupt and bloated as it is, do you think that the people in power, the central bankers and the government officials, are they actually going to allow deflation and bankruptcies?
I believe that those are things that by definition have to happen. They might be able to engineer the when and the how, but I don't think you can stop it. I mean, it's, people think that you can maintain overvalued markets for eternity. And I go, well, it'll be the first time that overvalued markets were maintained for eternity, right? As someone once said, you only die once. That's true. So predicting death is a long shot prediction too. But markets naturally regress to and through the mean. They always have. I think they always will. And right now we're way overvalued. We're about 120, 150% overvalued. And I can guarantee you at some point we will be undervalued again. That will always happen, and then we'll go back to overvalued. It's just that's the law of the jungle. The trip from overvalued to undervalued is going to be brutal.
Maybe for a couple months before they start changing the rules and intervention. I mean, what the narrative was, the Fed was reducing its balance sheet, right, with quantitative tightening and raising interest rates. They supposedly reduced the balance sheet by over $1 trillion in the last 12 to 14 months. But look at all those shadow liquidity programs post Silicon Valley Bank with the BTFP. I mean, the regional banks, I think, borrowed over $1 trillion. At one point, it spiked to an additional $1 trillion that the regional banks were borrowing. So those shadow liquidity programs, when you add them up, I mean, it offsets, in my opinion, the quantitative tightening.
Right, which therefore means we could stay overvalued longer, but we will still regress to and through the mean. And therefore, and if you want to talk about not dropping on an inflation adjusted basis, I'm okay with that. I mean, I think it sucks, actually. I mean, if they manage to cause the markets to tread water by kicking inflation up to 40 or 50%, then everyone will be hurt. Everyone will be hurt. There's no way to duck that. Inflation rots society. But then they could choose to do that, but that is a correct. Right now, for example, we've actually had a serious correction not a correction. My definition of correction is that you do two things: you adjust price and you adjust attitude. We've really done neither, but from say the last 2 years, inflation adjusted, the markets are probably down 30%. So in some sense, we've gotten started on correcting inflation adjusted markets. I think we have a long ways to go, in part because I think we're not only overvalued, but the denominator of the valuation models is not yet corrected. So price to whatever you want to divide through by the whatever has not yet corrected. But I think there's going to be, collapsing real estate sectors. There's going to be, we're now starting to see layoffs. And I think probably 2 years from now, we will have experienced some serious pain. I'm not a believer in the omnipotent Fed model. So for 40 years now, the Fed has been able to engineer V bounces. And I think that will end too. So I think we have to, absolutely. At some point, markets have a way of wrestling free of human intervention. And we have been, if you look at, I look at about 25 valuation metrics. We have been overvalued for all but about 2 months worth since we were about 50% overvalued in 1994. And we returned to historical fair value, went a little bit below it, I would say, in 08, 09. Spent about a month there. But at some point, we'll be looking at a huge inflation problem, and all of a sudden, companies will go down the tubes, bad investments will go down the tubes, everything will rot. The average person will be potentially starving to death because of this stupid inflation. And it will regress through the mean. And we will go through a period of great chaos and discomfort.
I mean, I would argue
they didn't let the markets correct, right? Would you rather have a bunch of small quakes in California or let the whole damn state just fall into the ocean? I think the small quakes work better.
Well, I don't think the Federal Reserve Bank has control over geology or seismic activity.
Well, but they're going to have geology and seismic activity at some point, is my point. I don't think they have the superpowers they think they have. In 1981, everything lined up perfectly. Here's my elevator pitch. In 1981, valuations were sitting so low. Let's use price earnings. I don't like it because you can cook the earnings like crazy. But back in 81, I don't think they were. We had a price earnings ratio of 6, which meant half the companies in the S&P 500 had a PE below 6. That's cheap. The Russians were just starting to put out to put out resources. They were desperate because they needed capital. China started selling labor at slave wages. The boomers not only were demographically hitting the workforce, but they brought their wives. And so over the next 40-year period, here's the money shot right here. Over the next 40, and none of those things are going to repeat. They can't repeat. So then what happens when they reverse?
So you're explaining that all those things were deflationary, right? So you're saying that
all
US
those things
was able
were deflationary. Interest rates dropped from 16, 17% down to essentially zero, right? So every one of those was a tailwind. As a consequence of those huge and non-repeatable tailwinds, the market valuations, which are inherently inflation corrected because it is the price of the market divided by something the market ought to track, whether it's revenue, price to book, Tobin's Q, you name it. There's about 25 of them. They compounded the valuations, which shouldn't compound anywhere. They should just flop around. And I guarantee you they're just going to flop around and they're going to get back to cheap at some point. But they compounded over the next 40 years at 3% a year. What happens if over the next 40 years, they compound at negative 3% a year to get back to cheap? And the answer is we'll get crushed. We will be crushed.
Well, also, David, that profit margins historically, I've read the work of value investor Vitaly Katznelson. I'm sure you've paid attention to his work. He's shown back through, I think, 100 years that profit margins go in cycles and they mean revert. However, the last 15 or 20 years, they have not. So the Fed is basically, I would say, artificially inflated, especially stock prices and home prices intentionally the last 10, 15, 20 years more. I would argue, David, that in 2008, 2009, the entire system collapsed and the Federal Reserve Bank went into full asset price inflation, full Ponzi mode with quantitative easing and zero interest rate policy.
That's correct, but it won't work. It can't work. So I just posted a tweet today. Just pondering the meaning of the universe. Microsoft has had a great dozen years, right? How could you bitch about that? Well, Microsoft's gains, 5-fold of those gains are valuation expansion. So if you just give back the valuation expansion, you let them have their revenues, you let them have all the stuff they did, all the growth, everything, but you take back the valuation expansion. That's an 80% correction in Microsoft. 80%. Just to take them back to their valuation 12 years ago. Did they seem like they were being thrown out with the trash 12 years ago? No. They were just reasonably priced.
The shares didn't do much while Ballmer was the CEO. I mean, he did a ton of bad acquisitions. The shares were permanently undervalued while he was CEO, and they wrote a bunch
I disagree. I disagree. I think they were fair value.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I was listening to value investors like Einhorn and others talk about how they were putting permanent discounts in a CEO because he was doing acquisitions and they were being written down to zero within 12 to 18 months.
Their price to earnings was like, 10. What's wrong with that? It's good. That's a decent return, right? That's not far from historical.
And the shares took off as soon as he left. Although I think they're still paying him. I think they're still paying him a lot.
That may be, but the valuation has expanded fivefold. When that contracts fivefold, which I guarantee you it will. Because, again, valuations mean regressing. If there's anything on the planet that's mean regressing, it's valuations.
Yeah, and they're playing games.
You can go back to ancient Rome and the valuations were the same.
I don't know. Did the Romans have control of capital markets where they can inflate asset prices like this?
No, but see, so what you're describing of the inflating of capital markets is inflation. So if you want to pretend like you're making a return because there's inflation, then you're welcome to do that. But I call that no gain.
Well, it's just the Canalon Effect. It's corruption. And for our listeners out, the one word, if I was going to explain the Canalon Effect, it's all about corruption. I call it Stagl Tax Lie. I mean, it's a game here in DC. They want to tax you more for asset prices. They want to raise the property taxes, the capital gains taxes on stocks and real estate.
Right. But here's the problem. And this clicked one day. You read about the 10 super stocks or the Mag 7 or whatever, the ones that have carried the market the whole way. And you read articles which they talk about, why you should have owned them. And I go, thanks for telling me now. You'll read articles about what are the 10 next stocks, and I can guarantee you no one knows, but it certainly isn't the Mag 7 or the 10 top stocks now. Those are not going to be the super stocks of the next decade. By any stretch of the imagination, those won't be. They're too overpriced. And so then, but what clicked was that out of the S&P 500, collectively, 490 of the 500 are providing zero returns to investors.
Yep.
How is that rational? How is that rational?
Well, I mean, I thought it was rational that the companies, there was a bifurcated economy in the real. So you had like people who are making under a couple $100,000 a year in the real economy the last 12 months. They were not doing very well with higher interest rates, consumer debt. Look at the small caps. I mean, the Russell 2000 for most of 2023 was in a bear market. It got absolutely obliterated.
The answer to your question is what you just said, though. The answer is the Canalon Effect. So these 490 companies, which some of them are winners and some of them are losers. So I'm saying collectively on purpose. But the Canalon Effect says that by the time everyone gets their grubby paws off of the money trickling down to investors, there's none left. And that is a consequence of indexing. If the market had a bunch of millions upon millions of decisions based on Ben Graham thinking, these companies, the bad ones, would be culled out. But it's not. It's dumb money in the form of, it's a tsunami of dumb money because we got convinced that you should buy a company without knowing anything about its fundamentals, because it's in an index. And then, by the way, when one gets really goddamn expensive, you should buy a lot of that one because it's the most heavily weighted in the index. And so indexing went from being a good idea to being just incredibly stupid. But I don't know how it will stop. I don't know when it will stop, but it will stop because every good idea becomes a racket eventually, and indexing has reached that point.
Well, the index funds also own the majority of a lot of these large cap stocks now. And that was not the whole point. I mean, decades ago, indexing was small. And now because of retirement accounts, and there was a lot of active fund managers that underperformed indexes and they didn't deserve the capital, a lot of these active portfolio managers, but it's just ridiculous. In terms of the Canalon Effect, though, I think an important point is it's not just index funds. I mean, it's DC spending. It's the budget deficits. Look at all the money that was wasted by both political parties here for military spending, aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine, Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, you should hear some of the stories. Like I heard the stuff that was snuck into the Inflation Reduction Act, why the Speaker of the House, McCarthy, was really fired. I mean, they snuck in a lot of extra spending.
Well, the Inflation Reduction Act was misnamed more than any act in history. That would be like giving money to Ukraine and calling it the Anti-War Act. The striking stat that clicked the other day is there was a 15-day period where our budget rose, our debt rose by $1 trillion. Depending on how you count taxpayers, which conservatively you might say there's only 100 million taxpayers because the rest are either receiving more money than they're getting or they're paying almost nothing. But you can go up to 200 million if you wish, but you're not going to find more than 200 million taxpayers. That means that we put on in 15 days enough debt that corresponds to $5,000 to $10,000 per taxpayer. I do not see how you can do that without eventually blowing to bits.
I call the current.
You can talk about the Fed. You can talk about all the shenanigans they can play. You put on $10,000 per taxpayer in 15 days. You keep doing that. You will destroy the fabric of the nation. And therefore, it will blow up one way or the other.
Well, the other major problem now is that you don't have the normal net buyers of U.S. Treasuries for the last couple decades that were there.
That's
so
correct.
China, Germany, Japan, they're no longer net buyers. So the non-G7 decided in 2022 with the Russia sanctions, and I think this week, and I think you were posting this article, that there was even more confiscation of Russia's assets this past week with more sanctions added in the last month or so. So they're still confiscating assets. I mean, the non-G7 central banks, if you're running a trade surplus, you have foreign exchange reserves, why are you going to buy U.S. Treasuries and if DC can just confiscate them?
So then the question becomes, with all these buyers of treasuries heading for the hills, and they've all left, who's going to buy the treasuries?
I call it no audit.
Answer. No... What's that?
Well, it's not, you can't prove it without an audit, so you can't prove it or disprove it. I call it no audit, no problem.
I'll tell you where it'll show up. It always shows up. It'll show up as a massive inflation. You can't hide reality forever. Right? The Soviet Union lied and lied and lied for 70 years. But in the end, the lies didn't in any way change the fact that it was a completely and utterly a failed system.
Oh, yeah, I agree. They didn't have dollar as the world. They didn't have the Russian ruble as the world reserve currency in the euro dollar system, though. They didn't have all this shenanigans to send the monetary inflation.
The world reserve currency, according to Triffin's Paradox or Triffin's Dilemma, is a suicide mission. It's like some person who's going to go suicide bomber who's given all the chicks and all the food and everything he wants, but in the end, he dies. That's what the world reserve currency is. You have to have a trade imbalance to be the reserve currency, and therefore then you die. And if we're putting $1 trillion of debt on in 15 days, which means, by the way, each taxpayer has approximately $250 a year of debt service on that trillion. Each taxpayer. In 15 days, they gave us $250 more annual debt service. We've got a government that shows zero sign of tightening the belt. Zero sign of tightening the belt. We're giving away hundreds of billions to, as you said, everyone imaginable. We have a government that has no understanding of the fundamental principles of A, economics, and B, regression to the mean.
I'll tell you, they don't care. They don't care. They're stealing as much as they can.
And therefore, that's the problem. And therefore, we will blow up. We will end up with guillotines. We'll end up with, the guys who get out of jail after January 6th. They'll come and get them. I don't know. We are heading for the complete collapse of an empire, in my opinion.
Yep,
I'm particularly in bad shape this week. I'm in bad shape this week because I watched Biden's speech where he was bragging about putting post-January 6th guys in jail to the tune of 870 years of prison term. 870, and he's bragging. Let's say they deserve the 870 years. It's still a very sad day that occurred, but not Biden, not that hog fucker. You can bleep me out if you want, but that bastard, the Biden administration right now is the most appalling administration this side of Ukraine. They are a complete sack of garbage. I'm just so mad. You're getting my blood up. I got to stop.
The levels of corruption here, I mean, the average American, I've tried to tell some friends about this who live in the Midwest or other parts of the country, the levels of corruption here, they don't want to hear the stories about how.
Well, here's what I am now. When I voted for Trump in 2016, my hand was shaking because he's a wackadoodle. In 2020, I was comfortable because he really had not blown up the system. There were things I didn't like about what he did and things I liked about what he did. I was a little nervous that his idiosyncrasies were causing more trouble than it was worth, but then they put Biden in there and I go, okay. So what I was hoping is the two parties would figure out something and put up credible candidates. We go back to normal. There's no evidence of that.
So now they're saying
that they're putting up a demented pervert who's a criminal who sold us to the Russians, sold us to Ukraine. His son's a crackhead. And they ignore the Constitution. They ignore everything. That's their idea. The Democratic Party is saying, that's the douchebag we're offering you from this party. You don't have a say. I think if you vote Democrat, I think if you vote for Biden, I've given up trying to retain friends. You vote for Biden, you're a sick bastard.
And Biden's considered a moderate too.
No, he's not. But he's not. He's not. No one with a half a brain thinks he's a moderate. He's an authoritarian. He's not a moderate. Call him a moderate all you want. He's not a moderate. He's throwing people in jail. He's weaponizing the Department of Justice. The guy is treasonous. He's the guy who should be in jail right now. Him and his administration. They should be. And so now I'm a wildly enthusiastic Trump supporter because I want to see him get in and I want to see him go Green Goblin. And it will be awful. But I want to do the experiment. I want to see if Trump can do what he promised to do the first time.
I think the average person doesn't understand about when they get the political appointees, that the political appointees at the head of each agency can only do so much, that there's the career bureaucrats here, and that those are the ones who enact policy. And even Trump, when his first regime, post 2016, he still couldn't get a lot of his political appointees, a lot of his people approved through the process of the system. So he didn't even get a lot of his own people in the first time. But then a lot of the bureaucrats didn't enact most of his policies. They just ignored it.
Right. And he fought the goddamn Russia collusion story. Trump had to put his family into his inner circle because he couldn't trust anyone. No question about it. He now has people he knows he can trust. So if Trump ends up in the White House, he's going to have a war cabinet. And it's not going to be an international war cabinet because I don't think he's going to go bombing the hell out of people the way everyone else did. I believe him when he wants to not be involved in wars. Biden, by the way, had the full backing of a party. He has the full backing of two parties because neither party wants Trump. Biden's appointments are a pathetic group of losers. Merrick Garland, he should be tried for treason. I could make the treason case against him. He's a liar. He's a pathetic, pathological liar.
This is how it works.
And that's who they chose.
This is how it works, Dave. In every administration, though, you have the same group of people, Republicans and Democrats, that hang around the DC metro area here. And when they're not in the White House, they're either working at a think tank or consulting, or they're doing lobbying. So
I totally get it, but it's so garish now.
So red flags. If Trump wins the next election and he hires a scumbag like John Bolton again, that's a big red flag to me. So there's certain people that are always looking.
No, he got bullied into Bolton. Bolton was the worst appointment he made. Bolton and Fauci. He couldn't get rid of Fauci because they had sold Fauci as the guy who was going to save the world. Trump couldn't afford to take the hit of firing Mr. Savior. Fauci killed many, many people. Fauci is a mass murderer. Let's talk about Fauci if you want. No. Fauci was a huge mistake. Bolton was a monstrous mistake. I think it was Trump's attempt to somehow get the neocons on his side. What a disaster that was. Bolton Bolton will be in the cabinet of Nikki Haley, who should never be allowed near Washington, D.C., let alone in the White House.
But she fits in perfectly with the crowd in D.C. I mean, she's a younger female version of John McCain or Leslie Graham.
That's why I think we're going to have a complete collapse of empire.
We're in full agreement about this. And is therefore,
And it's not sustainable. See, that's the thing. Whenever you say, well, they've got this lever and this lever and this lever, levers don't matter at some point. At some point, the levers stop mattering.
They've prolonged the system a lot longer than people thought, though. I mean, I remember like Jim Rogers, Doug Casey warning about the government spending out of DC 15, 20, 30. Jim Rogers, I think, was in Market Wizards 25, 30 years ago talking about this. I mean, they've been able to keep the system going way, way longer than people thought.
Yeah, so this is sort of like some guy's 99 years old, and you're saying he's not going to be able to last much longer, and then he's 102, and you go, wow, it's getting... But there is an age where that guy's going to die.
Well, I think it's that the non-G7 central banks are not buying U.S. Treasuries. So now we're starting to get.
So who's going to buy them? Who's going to buy them? Who's going to buy them?
The Federal Reserve Bank off balance sheet. From what I've heard, the stuff I heard with Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell, Silicon Valley Bank, and what's happened over the last like 9 to 12 months is absolutely bonkers. I'm not sure you'd believe half of it.
No, I believe it all. But here's the problem: when inflation goes back up the scale again. Right now, they're reporting inflation numbers that are ridiculous. Ask anyone who's gone to the grocery store. Ask anyone the numbers are fake at this point. The numbers weren't fake back in 1981. They got progressively more fake. But the problem is when the average person is suffering beyond comprehension from this inflation, then what's the Fed going to do when their policies are hyperinflationary? Are they really? What are they going to do? And the answer is they're either A, going to have to deal with the inflation, which I don't think they even know how, or B, they're going to ignore the inflation and then they will destroy the nation. This is the most militant I've been on any podcast. I do about 60 a year, and I'm losing my shit now. No, they will destroy the nation. If you don't respect inflation, you'll destroy the nation. Just ask anyone from Weimar, Germany.
Do you think Janet Yellen even cares? Do you think Janet Yellen even cares about that? I know she's not Treasury Secretary.
No, she doesn't care. That's the fucking problem. Yeah, that's the fucking problem. Our Secretary of Treasury is an idiot. She's a flat-headed hobbit. She doesn't care.
Too. Yeah, very corrupt.
Corrupt, right? Which means, therefore, there's no one driving the cab. Which means, therefore, we're doomed. Period. QED. That's the problem.
I mean, I don't think she cares if Wagyu is like $40 or $50 a pound or more at Whole Foods, because she has.
She will when the guillotines come out. She will when the guillotines come out.
That's probably why the elites are investing in bodyguards and mansions in other countries.
They should. They should. And it's going to be awful, right? This is not like when guillotines come out, it's the good news. It never is the good news. But what you don't do is you don't let it get here. Here's an interesting book for you. Michael Malice's The White Pill. It's a great book because it's a history of the Soviet Union. And my brother, I got him to read it, and he said, oh, the parallels with what we're seeing are amazing, actually. Not in terms of the details, but the ideas. And the White Pill, we all know that Stalin killed 40 million people. What very few of us know, and I didn't know anything about this, is between Lenin and Stalin, they killed 40 million, but it was how they did it. They got society to completely consume itself. And that's what we're doing.
Oh, there's so much infighting among gender, age, race, class, incomes. I mean, there's just so much infighting now, and people don't notice that there's all this Stagl Tax Lie. The elites are imposing all these draconian authoritarian policies. I mean, they're moving the system towards central bank digital currencies, cashless society, social credit score, all this crazy stuff.
Right. Debanking people who don't behave, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. And that is what I call a collapse of empire. So the guys who own Microsoft who think they're doing fine, well, that'll be great, right? Up until all of a sudden, you can't log into your computer because someone has taken down the grid because who knows what, right? I've never felt this unbelievable sense that there's not a person out there. And this is where I actually think Trump still has some of this. But it's so rare to see someone in which you can say, look, that guy right there, that person, that woman, that man, that whatever, still sort of understands the principles of the country that de Tocqueville wrote so glowingly about back in the 18th century. They've totally given up any sense of what the foundational principles that we stand for. So they say, okay, I'm going to get my VIG, I'm going to make a lot of money, but I won't do that. Well, the I won't do that part is gone now. It's completely obliterated. They'll do anything now. We've got a president who has sold us to Ukraine, he sold us to China, and who knows who else he sold us to. And nobody seems to care. I watched his son stomp out of Congress today. His son, the crackhead, the guy who as a crackhead was used to sell us to China, was used to sell us to Ukraine, he just walked out of Congress. How is that accepted? The Trump family all sat there and got raked over the coals.
He's a spoiled brat trust fund baby. There's a lot of kids in the DC metro.
No, his lawyers did it. It's not he's a spoiled brat. He didn't stomp out. His entire legal team stopped out. This is Biden saying, I don't care about the Constitution. I don't care about the system. I only care about Biden. I only care about authoritarianism that we're working on.
I mean, I would argue that most Republicans don't care about the Constitution. It's selectively enforced. So if you're going after a political enemy, then the Constitution is enforced. Otherwise, they ignore it most of the time.
I can name a couple Republicans who I trust. Unfortunately, it's for that reason that they're not in any position of power whatsoever. I was on a Zoom call with Ron Johnson, and he was very good. He was very convincing. And then someone said, well, we could do X, Y, and Z. And he said, you're dreaming. He said, you're dreaming. That's not going to do any good. So there are people out there, but they can't achieve anything.
Well, also most people in Congress don't care about that stuff. I mean, most of them only care about getting rich or getting richer. All they talk about, like off the record, a lot of these people is making more money, stock trades, real estate, and sex. That's all a lot of. I mean,
that's why we're a banana republic now. That is ultimately why the system will fail, because it's no longer founded on fundamental principles at all, not a whiff.
It's like the Roman Senate. Yeah, it's like the Roman Senate. The Roman Senate was so corrupt that the Roman people were begging for Julius Caesar to come in as emperor, I believe.
Right, but it didn't. The real problem came about 400 years later. But the Roman Empire ceased to exist. The Western Roman Empire ceased to exist when the advantages of being Roman were outweighed by the advantages of not being Roman. And we are at risk of society making that decision. Forget about if it's true, but we're at risk of society making that decision. The abrogation of free speech is on the line. We watch it. If you didn't learn from COVID that authoritarianism was knocking on the door, then you're just an idiot, in my opinion. If you didn't figure out from the COVID story, not you, figurative you, anyone who didn't watch COVID play out and say, holy shit, we got a real problem here, then you're just not paying attention. Go boost yourself. Get another. Get your 8th booster. I don't care. You're going to be cleaned out of the gene pool doing that.
Well, there's a shocking number of Americans that still trust the government, both political parties. They vote in the two-party system and think it'll affect change. They trust Big Pharma. They trust Wall Street banks. They still trust things that they trust that the consumer price index is headed to 2%. I see it everywhere, that there's lots of Americans who still trust this stuff. But David, I would say that the government, both political parties, Congress, the White House, and then 5 or 6 industries. So you have Wall Street, Big Pharma, military industrial complex, big tech. These industries are so corrupt, so powerful. They're ruining everything, and then they're taking more control, and they're making it so there's no competition.
Right. And even to the bitter end in the Soviet Union, there were people who believed in the Soviet Union too. Even when it had basically completely and utterly fallen apart, they still believe. So, there's no fixing stupid. There's so many things coming at us that it's very, very hard to understand any one of the issues. One of the things that bothers me the most, and you can tell things bother me, is the garishness with which they do it now. It used to be, if you whacked Kennedy or something, you had to try to get away with it. And now they do things just like we don't have to get away with it because we own the media. So we'll just get our buddies in the media to not say anything and we're done. That's fine. How long did it take for the media to admit Biden's laptop was real? Now, here's the problem with Biden's laptop. It was obvious within a day it was real. And it was obvious to anyone with a brain bigger than a walnut that the way you check it is by looking at a couple of the emails and saying, okay, he sent an email to this guy on this date, and go ask the guy, did you get an email on that date? So you could confirm the laptop was real just by checking a couple of the email linkages and say, well, someone has that laptop. Yet the media, those whores, those complete whores in the mainstream media, shut down the story. So they know they have special constitutional protections. They are not living up in any way, shape, or form to the responsibilities that give them those constitutional protections. What those guys should do, the media should be sued into oblivion by various people who are being slandered, and that will make space for the independent media like the Substack crowd. But the mainstream media is a worthless sack of garbage with the occasional bright light somehow showing through for fun. They let some stay, but of course they got rid of Tucker. That was fun. So I just don't know. CNN is worthless. I mean, MSNBC is worthless. The mainstream channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, I don't even watch them. So I don't even know if they're worthless, but I'm guessing they are.
There's like an alternate reality with the quote unquote news. I'm using air quotes here. It's all political narrative and spin and promoting a certain type of objective. I mean, they knew about the Epstein stuff, a lot of them, for 20 years, 10, 15,
well,
20 years.
They also know about the Ukraine stuff, which they refuse to tell. What people don't understand, I dug into the Ukraine story. We were dead wrong. We were dead wrong. The reason there are 500,000 dead Ukrainians is because NATO, aka the United States, wanted that war, period. They pushed Putin into doing his only play, and so he took the play. And now we've got 500,000 dead Ukrainians. Nothing good has come from those 500,000 dead Ukrainians. We didn't exhaust the Russians, which, by the way, I don't think is really something we should have been trying to do. And yet we got 500,000 mothers who've lost their kids because Victoria the Hutt Newland wanted a war.
Well, the military industrial complex wants that too, because they have it's basically clearing inventory, and they use human as collateral damage. So like the military industrial complex companies, they want to sell those older, tanks, planes, missiles, guns. They want to sell those to another country. And that's where the foreign aid. So it's a
okay.
scam.
So tell me why we shouldn't take the guys who are making those calls and have a Nuremberg trial and execute them. Tell me why 500,000
well, in the Constitution,
dead Ukrainians.
yeah. I mean, if you're going to stick to the Constitution, it sounds like it's a treasonous act against the United States. But unfortunately, they ignore the Constitution. So, I mean, you have both political parties are in agreement with that type of foreign policy. That's where the money is.
Here's the thing I'm militantly against also. I try not to draw conclusions that get me to stop thinking. So if someone says, Bill Gates caused the pandemic, then you get to say, okay, I now have the answer. What's for dinner? Let's move on. So I do avoid. So when people say, oh, there's a uniparty, oh, they're both on the same side. I get it. But if that caused you to stop thinking about the problem, then you've made a mistake. And so I can't just say, oh, it is just because. The word just, the implication that, well, this is the way it is. I can't live with that.
Well, if you don't have rule of law, I mean, like the laws are selectively enforced. So, and then
I know. So someone should go out there and somehow deal with that. And I don't know how to do it, but I think at some point it will be done, and it will be horrific. It will be horrific. And it will be horrific because the goddamn guy said, let them eat cake. And they said, no, we're not going to eat cake this time. And that's where we're headed, in my opinion.
So
that is where we're headed.
So with I'm in agreement that this is towards the end of empire. They're just desperate. They're doing tons and tons of desperate policy measures. Trillions. From what I've heard, trillions off balance sheet. I mean, when the 10-year, from what I heard, when the 10-year Treasury yield got to around 5%, Janet Yellen panicked, and her and voting Fed governors are doing modern monetary theory, quantitative easing, debt monetization off balance sheet, and that's why the 10-year Treasury yield is down so much in the last couple of months.
Well, but Yellen's a pinhead of no consequence. The problem is she's in a position of great consequence. And so we've yet again staffed an administration with pinheads. Again, we're not being offered leadership. And at some point, somehow the white knight will show up. or we just go down an authoritarian hole, and it will cycle. Soviet Union is gone now, right? China came out of its dark period under Mao, who also killed tens of millions, and green shoots. But the green shoots will be long after I'm dead. That's great. But maybe we won't recycle. I don't know. But the point is, everybody in the fucking country should be mad. Everybody should be mad. And they shouldn't be mad at each other. I mean, I'm frustrated that people vote for Biden. I don't see how you can look at the warts of various candidates and say, I'll vote for Biden. His aren't warts. He's done stuff that I think is just truly appalling. And I was fine with Obama. I didn't like his politics. But he stood at the podium. I'm going, well, at least the Democrats served up someone who kind of looks like a leader. I'd take Carter. I could have voted for Bernie, but the Democrats said, we can't have Bernie. Now, Bernie is a socialist. I'm a Reagan Republican or a Goldwater conservative, probably a better way to say it. But I would have said, they'll keep Bernie in check. I'm not positive that's true now because it's pretty clear there's an agenda. But they're not even offering us leaders. They're giving us AOC. And by the way, AOC didn't just bulldoze her way. She responded to a cattle call. They recruited AOC because they said, we need a good-looking nitwit that we can push around. The DNC created AOCs and the various characters like that. The DNC is a crime syndicate. And you say, okay, now we understand. No, but it's not adequate. I can't just say, well, they're a crime syndicate, and then stop with that. I can't put a period on that sentence because I'm mad. And I'm mad because they're giving it all away. We had a unique position in history, and they're giving it all away. And, again, we killed something like 4.5 million people in the Middle East over the last 20 years. Why is that not being called a Holocaust? Why are the Palestinian protesters in the streets? Where were they for the last 20 years? The last 20 years while we were slaughtering people all over the Middle East. Where were they? Why were they not gluing themselves to the highway then? Because they're too stupid. They don't understand what's going on. They don't understand they're part of the story. They should read The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, and they'd realize that they're the pathetic, unwashed masses who are part of social movements that go down the tubes. They are part of the social movement that's taking us down the tubes.
Or maybe someone's funding those protests now. Maybe they
definitely are funding those protests. They're funding both sides, right? I don't get into the Israel-Palestine debate. I mentioned it, probably should not have even done that. I have avoided it for years because there's no win there. There's no way. People say, well, you're supporting a Holocaust. I go, I've been focusing on Holocaust for the last 20 years. Where were you? Where were you when they were bombing Yemen? Where were you when we were trying to bomb Syria? Where were you when we attacked Iraq because they caused 9/11, but there was no Iraqi within sight? Or attacked Afghanistan, even though there was no Afghan in sight.
And fake weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, we can go on.
Fake weapons of mass destruction. You go on and on and on. But then these people, these nouveau, feel-good people, they get all bent out of shape about Ukraine, which didn't have to occur at all if NATO had just said, okay. Putin was very clear what it would take to not have that war, and NATO didn't want anything to do with it. So basically, the war in Ukraine is not a war of Russia versus Ukraine. It is a war of Russia versus NATO, and he's kicking our asses.
And the Nord Stream pipelines got blown up, too. I wonder who did it. It wasn't the Ukraine.
Right. And by the way, there's a rumor running around today that Lloyd Austin got killed in Kyiv. It'll be interesting to see if that holds up.
Who?
Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense. There's a rumor running around today that he got killed.
Did you hear the tax loophole for people in Congress? I was told this by a money manager off the record that if you're in Congress, there was a loophole snuck in that if they fly to a war zone for a 24-hour period, they get an exemption on all their taxes for that year.
they're going to vote themselves anything they want. And the quantities of money now have grown enormously. If you read Peter Schweitzer's books, which now at this point just could be an Excel spreadsheet with all the quantities of money raked in by all the different political parties. But at one point, they weren't making a lot of money. What was appalling is they'd pass some $5 billion bill and get 50,000 kickback. And I'm going, you're selling us for peanuts. Now they're not selling us for peanuts anymore. Now they're making a lot of money. So,
oh, dude, they're doing stock options trade. They're doing stock options trades. I mean, the Pelosi's are clearing. The Pelosi's are clearing like a couple $1 million in a week now with stock options.
Yeah, right. And it's legal because they passed the laws. And I don't know at this point what to do, because I'm frustrated, because we got to wake up pretty soon. It probably is too late, in my opinion. I mean, we're not doomed to the extent we have great natural resources. We're in theory an educated population. I'm not convinced that's completely true anymore.
Yeah, especially with our STEM scores.
Right. But that's repairable. We could start educating again. But we have a lot of real estate. But last night our power went out, and I was thinking, China could do this to us, and it wouldn't just be 5 hours of no power.
Well, look at the warnings from the World Economic Forum. They're warning now. They're making videos about a cyber attack coming. So,
well, a friend of mine told me that news of cyber attacks, this was in the spring one year, that news of cyber attacks would start showing up in the fall, and lo and behold, in November, Seymour Hersh started talking about Iranian hackers and stuff. And I go, there it is right there. So they knew it was coming. This year I wrote about directed energy weapons. These are basically Reagan's Star Wars. They're very real. It is unknowable how destructive they are, because everything I can get to is 40 years old and unclassified. So, but there's no question there are such things as these space-based cyber weapons, these space-based laser weapons, and directed energy weapons, and microwave weapons, and masers and lasers, and you name it. And I dug into it, and so people say, no, that's not possible. I go, well, on August 6, 1945, we learned that the impossible became possible in a microsecond. That's when Hiroshima got bombed. And so we'll find out. We'll find out.
I would say over the decades, there's been trillions of dollars in research and development off balance sheet from Pentagon spending on these types of projects with like rail guns and lasers and God knows what. I mean, Alex Jones was interviewing a lot of former military people about this stuff for decades. I don't know how much of it is real or not, but.
Well, I know it's real because I read RAND reports and stuff about it. So, I mean, it's absolutely real. What I don't know is the level of the behind the industrial paywall 2023 as opposed to in front of the paywall 1985. I don't know where we've gotten to, but at some point we'll probably discover where we've gotten to. And you talk about dollar reserve currency. I can't imagine a better way to lose reserve currency status and weaponizing the dollar the way Biden did. So his biggest boneheaded move of all the moves was weaponizing the dollar against Russia. If having reserve currency is important, I don't understand why there is such a thing as reserve currency. There's one argument for it. One by Lynn Alden was made that convinced me that there's merit. But with the aid of computers, I can buy something in any currency, and in nanoseconds, it can be converted to any other currency.
Well,
so the idea of reserve.
It was easier for central banks to put reserves, for their trade surpluses into. They have to put in something large. So it's either gold tonnage or treasuries. It has to go into something super large and a market that's super large and super liquid, right? So that's why the reserve currencies are.
But what it really is, therefore, is in some sense it's not a reserve currency. It's just the dominant currency in a basket. And right now we're giving away our share of that basket. Because if you are another country and you're going, oh, look at that, you piss off the United States, they'll steal our money then you're going to find an alternative.
Well,
So the idea of taking Russia's assets was a bad idea. The idea of giving Russia's assets to Ukraine is an insane idea, except for the fact that the Ukrainians won't get a penny of it. So we're giving it to somebody, but I don't know who.
Well, in the past, the world reserve currency was also backed by gold. So, I mean, like, and then they got rid of the international gold standard, by 1971? So the only reason that there was a fiat currency before, it was pegged to a gold standard first. So they have prior to the dollar in 1971, there was no unbacked world reserve currency. That was just a pure fiat currency.
Right. And we could easily end up back there too. And people say, oh, no, we won't. I go, yeah, you wait. Well, maybe the Bitcoin guys are right. Maybe the gold guys are right.
Well,
one of the two.
I honestly don't think any government, including China, wants a gold. If you go to a gold standard, my argument is that there has to be convertibility. And then once there's convertibility, then the metal starts leaving the country. So I think these other governments and central banks, they're buying gold tonnage, but it's as a hedge. It's not for a gold standard because honestly, do you think China wants a gold standard when they know they have to bail out their banks with their real estate bubble? I don't think they want a gold standard. I think they're hedging.
How many tons of gold do you think China has?
A lot. I don't know the real number. The private sector in China demand is enormous. The government has stockpiled 10,000, 20,000 tons at least. I mean, I've heard upwards of 30 or 40,000 on some estimates. It's at least 10 or 20,000 tons. They're not going to give you the real number. That's not how the Chinese Communist Party operates.
I've seen estimates up to 85,000.
85,000. Is there even that much gold?
Yeah. India has a ton of gold too. If you take the jewelry off everyone's neck and you rate all the weddings and everything, there's a lot of gold. I think there's 150,000 tons of gold, crudely speaking, in the world.
I think the U.S. at in the 30s or 40s, I think the U.S. had 30,000 tons of gold before it started leaving.
Right. We don't know how much the U.S. has, so.
Well, that's intentional too.
Right. Well, it's possible we don't have any or very little. It's also possible that we have gold, but it's somebody else's, but we've just shown them that we won't necessarily give it to them.
So for listeners out there, those are the derivatives over the counter. So those are the gold leases and the gold swaps. I mean, Alan Greenspan has talked about that in the past when he was Fed chairman, that there's a lot of gold leases.
I don't care about leases. I care about who has the gold. And so we might have 85 tons of gold in our vaults.
Oh, you mean like the 85 vaults? So you mean like 8,000 tons of Fort Knox?
8,500. Yeah, we might have 8,500 tons, but we don't know who the official owner is, and the official owner doesn't know if they'd ever get them back. At one point, I think it was Germany or France asked for a bunch back, and after some hand-wringing, I think they got it. But it was politically tricky for a while. I think that was about, 8 years ago. And if people start demanding their gold, it's going to get interesting. And I'm still waiting. The hodlers hate this, but Bitcoin is either the great savior, which I don't put a high probability on, but I understand the enthusiasm, all the way to a psyop by the NSA to create enthusiasm for digital before they get wiped out and bring in CBDCs. So there's a wide range of possibilities for Bitcoin. The goldlers and the hodlers have a huge Venn diagram overlap in terms of their interests in protecting themselves.
The mistake a lot of them only own one or the other, and then they fight with each other all the time. I mean, there's not a lot of diversification in some of that crowd. So there's a lot of people that are all in on certain stocks or real estate or gold or silver or Bitcoin, and then they don't have much diversification. Yeah,
I don't own any Bitcoin because it's a long story, but I don't trust it. And there are hodlers who really know what they're doing, and the fact that they trust it should cause me to pause. But there's a ton of hodlers who do not understand what they're doing, and I think there's going to be a lot of losses out there by the unsuspecting. And Bitcoin could either be swallowed by the official system in some way. I don't know how. I know there's guys who've read up on this who are thinking this guy doesn't know anything. That's pretty accurate, actually.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a bunch of government officials and politicians here in the DC metro area, and they own a lot of Bitcoin. They trade it. So there's a lot of them speculating on Bitcoin. I don't know if they plan on holding it long term.
I have no interest in the speculator. Someone wants to speculate in Bitcoin, that's fine. Sell Beanie Babies, I don't care. I don't want speculating in stocks. Bitcoin, I don't care. I'm trying to preserve wealth. I'm trying to accumulate it and preserve it. And trading is not my shtick. And if you told me some stock's going to go up before going to zero and you don't know when it's going to go to zero, I'm not interested in riding it up. So it's like if you knew there was a train coming, you didn't know when, you're not going to camp on the tracks.
Well, you're a value investor, so I've had a lot of conversations with you over the years. So yeah, you're looking for undervalued companies at reasonable or undervalued cash flow multiples, companies that have some growth, kind of Benjamin Graham or Warren Buffett type of values.
Well, the problem is there's very few of those, and if let's say the P of the market's 30 for fun, I don't. It's a hard number to get. There are people who say, "Oh no, it's 16 or 17." I think you're delusional. Let's call it 30 for fun, and if it goes from 30 down to 6 again, how many years? I don't know. Maybe never, but I don't think so. Never's too long. And that means that the companies that were cheap now are going to be dirt cheap later. Dirt cheap later. Ben Graham used to talk about buying a company that was priced at half book value. Find me a company that's priced below book. I have a couple.
They're all in commodities. They're U.S. and Canadian oil producers.
Right.
There's gold mining companies. Right. They're all in commodities.
And they've been widow makers because no one has figured that out yet. And so I had a very prominent hedge fund manager, money manager in Europe, who's a friend, tell me he thinks I've lost my edge investing. It's serious. And I actually think I've done pretty well, given that I'm trying to set up for the apocalypse. If you can set up for the apocalypse and have a positive return, I think you've done pretty well.
Well, let me add for the energy plays. So the energy plays, if you look at it, say a coal miners on a cash flow multiple, free cash flow multiple, earnings per share, they're super cheap. The problem, there's not the demand to buy those shares because institutional investors, they have ESG mandates. They are not allowed to go buy coal mining stocks. If you're a bank, you can't go fund a new coal mine.
That's why you buy them. That's why you buy them.
Well, you're buying a cheap stock, but the problem is there's not going to be a lot of additional shareholders coming on and driving up the price for a multiple re-rating. So you are buying.
Let me see if I got this right. You're saying it's not a good idea to buy a company that has like a 20% return? I'm talking about a business. I'm talking about a business now.
So you're going to get the dividend. You're going to get the free cash flow, and you're going to get the maybe a dividend check, but you're not going to get the share price re-rating, which is what most people want. Most people want what, a 5x or 10x run. You're not going to get that with a coal mining stock because you're not going to have.
This is the thinking of a market top. People have lost all. They're thinking in terms of poker chips. The fact is, if you show me a company where you say, Dave, based on the cost of buying this company, if there was a gas station down the street, said, look, that thing has a cash flow of $200,000 a year, and I'll sell it to you for $1 million. Well, that's a 20% return annually. I'll take that. I don't care if no one comes along and offers me money for that gas station. I'll take $200,000 a year. And at some point, if the PE goes to 1, I'm okay with that too. I'll buy more. And so the point being is that there's so many companies that are so overpriced. There's so many companies alive today in the S&P that will go cradle to grave without making anyone any money. Along the way, people will think they made money, but it's like having a farm. If I sold you 100,000 acres in Nebraska, but you never harvested a crop, what good is it? You have to harvest a crop. You shouldn't be able to get rich just watching the price of something move around. That's just trading. I'm okay with traders as long as you understand you're a trader.
They
and
don't
by the
understand.
way,
They call themselves investors now. That's the problem.
And that's why it's a top. We've got the dumbest money on the planet right now buying stuff, and they don't understand what they're doing. By the way, Edward Chancellor's book, The Price of Time. Edward's a legend. It's a great book. It's very readable. It came out about a year or two ago. And if you listen to guys like Druckenmiller and Dalio, who I think is way overrated. Dalio is. Druckenmiller, no, he's underrated. These guys all see horrific futures. And they're just stunned at how long it's taking for the future to arrive. But that's what markets do.
Well, Dalio got stuff manipulated. Remember, he wrote the beautiful deleveraging white paper, and there was no actual. That was 2011 or 2012.
There was no deleveraging.
Yeah, I mean, I read his book Principles. I mean, he took a private jet to the European Central Bank, and he got private meetings with Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke and the head of the European Central Bank. I mean, he influenced policy. He got asset prices inflated.
By the way, though, there are hedge fund managers, serious ones, who actually think he's just a total fraud. Now, I'm just saying, I don't know what to make of that. But I decided to read his one of his most recent books, and it's The Changing World Order. I had to Amazon the thing. Changing World Order. It's actually very good. It's like The Fourth Turning, but with a greater emphasis on war cycles and economic cycles. But it's really very fourth turning flavor without the sociological mumbo jumbo in it. And he says he talks about 6 phases, not 4. And he says we're sort of right on the transition between 5 and 6. And phase 6 is where you get total bloodbath, complete bloodbath, literally bloodbath. Not quite literally bloodbath. It's not a bath. But he says we're about, there's a number of guys saying we're about to enter a war period. And a war period is going to be unimaginable because it's not going to be a war period like sleeping in the London Tube. It's going to be a war period like what the hell happened to our power? What the hell happened to our food supply? What the hell happened to everything? How the hell am I going to eat if I can't buy anything? That's what this is going to be. If people don't think China could hack us into oblivion, they're not paying attention.
Well, the other problem is there hasn't been a lot of investment on the supply side in commodities. So we did have a big boom in commodities for 12 to 18 months in commodity prices. There was not the investment because the commodity prices didn't stay high to invest in a lot of new supply. You're seeing food shortages, news stories, crop yield failures, food shortages, famine all over the globe, rice shortages, all these things. Wheat prices are up. All these soft commodity prices are up.
Some of those are engineered. Yeah, I'm very liquid, right? I mean, I'm really in a liquid position. My actual equity exposure is very low. And if you put a gun to my head and said, look, Texas Hold'em, put them all in, where do you put it? I would go commodities. And I am exposed to commodities. A lot of gold. But I think, when the selling starts, everyone pays. Right, Philip Morris will go down, and if Philip Morris has a nice revenue stream and pays him a big dividend, that's okay. It'll hurt. But if you were offered, here's a question I'd like to ask. Okay, Jason, if I offered you a 30-year Treasury, U.S. Treasury, what's not understood about? Well, you don't know if they're going to default. You don't know what inflation's going to be. You don't know anything that I don't know. Right? There's ambiguity about 30 years of U.S. debt. But if I offered you a 30-year Treasury and I said the one thing you can't do is you can't hedge it, you can't sell it, you have to buy it to clip the coupon to get paid a revenue stream, what interest rate would you demand to take that Treasury and all the ambiguities, everything going forward for 30 years? What revenue would you do? What interest rate would you demand? That's the real question. What would you demand?
A number that the U.S. federal government could not afford.
No. I'm asking you. No, I'm not. I'm asking you a number. Give me a number where you'd say, okay, sold. It's an auction. They're auctioning treasuries under this set of rules. What interest rate would get you to bite?
It would have to be right now. It would have to be 10, but 10%, above 10%. But locking in for 30 years, I mean, that's going to be tiny. I mean, the government's can't afford it, and it's going to need a higher inflation rate than 10% annualized inflation rate.
And therefore, you couldn't afford to take 10 either, right? 10% would be too low. So what number would you take?
The government can't afford 10% either. I mean,
no, that's right. These are all the ambiguity. So what number would you demand?
I wouldn't want any part of that, but you have a lot of people buying what TLT, right? So
I'll give you an answer. Would you take 50%?
Now 50% sounds good, but that might not sound good a few years from now.
Well, all it has to do is pay a 50% for 2 years. You got your money back.
This is true.
Okay, so now we go, what about 40%? You say, okay, got to last 2.5 years, 30%, 3 years. 3 point something, right? What interest rate would you say, look, I'm willing to take the risk at that interest rate? Where's the line in which the gavel drops and you get the 30-year treasury?
I mean, this is all
what interest rate?
The math is absurd, though, because the government can't afford any of this. The government can't even afford, I think, 5 or 6 for
and therefore, this is yet another unknown. And I'm asking you, what interest rate would you demand with this as one of the many unknowns?
Well, they might force us to buy those 30-year U.S. Treasuries and put it in our retirement accounts, and then they're going to inflate it away. We might not have a choice.
These are all non-answers to my question.
That's because I don't think there is a good answer to your question.
Yeah, there's an excellent answer. I already gave you a couple. 100% you'd take. 50% you'd take.
The government can't afford it, though, so you're not going to get that, though.
Now, I'm saying, let's say I set it up such that you can do it. You'd take 50%. What interest rate would you not take? Because, by the way, that 30-year treasury is going to exist for 30 years. So someone is going to own it. What it tells you first, the first message of this question is, A, it's a real high number. It might not be 30, because if you're demanding to get all your money back in 3 years, that seems ridiculous. It could be a bad decision, but it's not likely to be a bad decision. I don't know what is likely to be a good decision, but what it tells you is the treasury is profoundly mispriced. In no way, shape, or form is priced to provide you a revenue stream with risk management built into it.
Well, and that goes back to, I don't think we have real capitalism or real free markets anymore. I think things, almost all the, and I'm using air quotes, or markets are heavily managed or manipulated or distorted by the policies from DC and the Federal Reserve Bank and the Treasury. They're just,
and therefore we're doomed.
I don't think the VIX is properly. I think there's a lot of shenanigans in the VIX. I think
I wouldn't touch the VIX.
Well, I'm just talking about how much volatility there is, like in small caps and some of these other stocks. The VIX is artificially low. Look at what we've had in the bond yields on the 10-year Treasury. You don't think the stock market would be affected by that? I mean, the VIX didn't move.
I think the stock market's 150% overvalued, I think it's going to take a sneeze in Zimbabwe to tip that thing over at some point. But here's what it's got to do. The stock market to really correct. So the market in 0809 at the bottom, it spent roundly guesstimated somewhere between 1 or 2 months under historical fair value. You go, well, what's historical fair value? It's 100 years of what people on average wanted to return out of equities. 100 years, historical fair value. Between 1870 and 1994, it's a flat, it wobbles back and forth, but it's flat as a pancake. I call that historical fair value. Then it lifted off. Then it took off. I don't put that average in there because something's going on. Something very bad is going on. So then the question is, but using standard metrics, not Dave's metrics, we spent about 2 months below historical fair value. So you can argue that it was cheap. I thought there was another halving in it. I thought we were going to do I don't remember what it was, 60%. I thought I was going to do 80%. Correction. We had done so much damage. What I didn't see coming was $30 trillion. $30 trillion. I did not see that coming. So
zero interest rate policy for almost 15 years, quantitative easing, Fed balance sheet expansion, all those. The
Yeah, I know.
alphabet soup of liquidity and bailout programs.
It's all super reckless, ranting, necrotic monetary policy by people who think they're too important. That's the problem.
Well, it's
And
not
so they were able.
It's not their money.
I know it's not their money.
It's other people's money, and they know
it wasn't
that
Lenin's money either, and it wasn't Stalin's money either. It didn't mean that the Russian people didn't get deep sixed.
Oh, I'm saying that like they know it's not their money and they don't care because they know that they can profit from the corruption. So they know that like the stock market's going to get juiced. So they go in there and buy the stocks cheap and they inflate the assets. What the Fed governors were front running the QE programs. Jerome Powell was doing it too.
So if you follow that line of thinking, then they will also know when it's time to get the hell out of the way and let it go into free fall. Because they know if you buy an equity market, by the way, here's an interesting one. John Crudell did this with the Russell 2000. Horizon Kinetics did it with the Triple Q. They did the math on what the PE ratio were. Now, you look them up and you go, oh, the PE ratio of the Triple Q is 24. Well, what you find out is it's not really 24. And this is stunning that they do this. And apparently it's in the prospectus. I didn't check that, but according to the Murray Stahl, it's in the prospectus. When a stock is in the Triple Q or in the Russell 2000, Crudell, same analysis. If it has a PE above 40, they round it down to 40. If it doesn't have a PE because it has no earnings, they give it a PE of 40. The maximum possible PE, either of those two indices could possibly get, in theory, is 40. So the fact that it's 24 tells you nothing. When they take the two groups, Crudell, the Russell 2000, Horizon Kinetics, the Triple Q, and they calculate the PE by producing a Berkshire-like conglomerate of companies, and they take all their earnings and divide by the market cap, and you ask, what's the PE of that? 90, 95, 100. So the people who buy the Triple Q thinking they're buying safely because they're paying 22, but these are rapidly growing companies, so that's fine. They're buying an index that's priced to return 1%.
Well, the Mag 7 got up to what in the last 3 or 4 months, it got up to 50 times revenues, and they had almost no revenue growth the last couple of quarters. So it was getting ridiculous. Those indexes,
right? 50 times revenues is approximately, crudely speaking, probably 8 times fair value.
50 times revenues, but no growth. So they were paying a high revenue multiple with like no growth. So you're in a situation now where Apple basically is doing share buybacks with debt and tons of like games. They can't really grow too much because they're already super large. The only way their market cap's going to go up is on multiple expansion. They're not actually really growing.
You're making my case. You're making my case in the sense that you're saying the only way they can keep the Ponzi scheme going is by promoting the Ponzi scheme. Ponzi schemes all fail. They all fail. Every last one of them in history ever has failed.
So is debt-based fiat currency and credit. It's also a Ponzi scheme.
I agree.
The Dow plays similar games too. I mean, every time there's a Dow company, a few of them older ones, right, that have losses that don't have earnings per share growth, they kick it out. If the company's underperforming the Dow, they kick it out and they put in a better company.
This gets back to the Ben Graham, Warren Buffett, or if you want, Michael Berry. Michael Berry says when you buy an asset, your default setting should be, your break the glass should be, if the price goes down, just hang on to it. Now, would you be willing to do that with NVIDIA? No. Would you be willing to do that with Philip Morris? Yes. I've got some platinum miners priced with PE of 5 and a solid balance sheet that they won't move. They refuse to move. But if they keep mining platinum and it turns out rhodium, and this is where it gets risky, and South Africa doesn't go to shit, they will keep cranking out the big dividends. Their big dividends are not debt-driven dividends. They're driven by selling product. And right now, what do you think the real inflation rate is? The real inflation rate.
John Williams has it around 9-ish. I would say it's a little substantially above 9. So I would say it's probably double. I'm in that there's still stagflation. So for mainstream America here, small business owners, I mean, my costs are all up. The stuff that's in the consumer price index, I call it the changing propaganda index.
Well, so we all have our own inflation rate because, for example, I don't have a mortgage. And so my inflation rate are things like the growth in taxes, the growth in food prices, the growth in whatever the hell it is my wife keeps buying from Amazon. I'm going to look up another one right now while we're here. Chepwood Index. Butowski. I don't know. Sounds like some guy.
Ed Butowski. Yeah, I've interviewed him.
Yeah, well, that's a good interview. Butowski looks at 500 products from 10 major cities. That's how he does it. And it turns out right now he's got an inflation rate of for the 10 cities, between 10.1 and 13.7%. I was on a panel discussion with Jimmy Iorio, who, if you don't know,
I know Jim. Yeah, he's from Chicago.
I know you do. Yeah. He also happens to own a very successful restaurant. I talked beets and carrots with him about his restaurant. He's doing well in his restaurant. And I asked him, how much is the price? How much have the price of goods and services risen for your restaurant? The cost of running it. He said 40% in 2 years. I talked to a guy in the local diner.
That does not surprise me. He gives me the same sort of
answers. Well, that's the inflation rate for a lot of people. That is their inflation rate because they're just trying to put food on the table. And I bought sliced turkey the other day that cost me $13.99 a pound for sliced turkey. $13.99 a pound. I can guarantee you I've never paid close to $13.99 a pound for sliced turkey. Here's another inflation that people ignore. When you buy a product and it lasts you 20 years and you then replace it, I just had a microwave go out on me about 3 or 4 years ago. And I think it was the original. So I think I know how old it was. It was 1989, 2009, called 25-year-old microwave. And then I replaced it.
It lasted that long?
Well, it was a good product back in 1989. But now the one I bought, replaced it with a couple of years ago, lasted 3 years. So to accurately calculate inflation, you've got a factor of 8 you have to put in there. Because you can't just compare the price of 2 microwaves. You got to compare the price as a function of the service they provided. And one of them gave 8 times less service than the original one. And so when you say microwave A, microwave B, they cost the same amount of money, therefore let's do some Boston commission, pretend like the new one's even better. In fact, you're leaving out a factor of 8. And that's the hidden inflation I haven't seen anyone but me talk about. Now, if someone out there knows that someone's monitoring that, send me an email at dbc6@cornell.edu. I want to see that. Now, here's another stat that I wrote about this year. Ron Grice of the Chart Store, he charts his ass off. He sent me a chart of the markets corrected for inflation, but not CPI inflation. He corrects it for M2 money supply, which strikes me as a super clean inflation correction. Might not be perfect, but it sure beats some guys making shit up about the grocery store. And it turns out that over the last 100 years, the capital gains in the market are zero. Zero gains if you correct for M2 money supply. It is argued from that the entire gain of the market over those years are dividends. And what were the dividends on average? Turns out they went from 6.5 to 1.5, so they're probably around 4. So then he updates it. He sends me a new draft after I wrote my shit up this year. He says, let me give you a revised version. And he shows the total return of the market, which includes dividends, pumped in over the last 100 years. And it was 3.79%, which is spot on sort of what you might guess at the average dividend return over that period. Now, when the dividends go from 6.5 to 1.5, that tells you the market's overvalued by a factor of 4.
It also tells me that debt-based fiat currencies did a really good job with the Canalon Effect, getting certain people rich, Wall Street rich, and getting those tax receipts for all levels of government. I mean, government's flush with, government's record tax receipts for that asset price inflation in nominal value. The real returns that you said are...
But they're still borrowing at a phenomenal pace. Now, the last exclamation point is if anyone reads Buffett's Fortune article from 1999, he gets to the end, he says, when you calculate everything, and he includes everything and all the fees and everything, and he says, you cannot expect to get more than 4% return. Now, he does not include taxes. So if you say some of that shit's going to get taxed, now you're well below 4%. Now, here's the problem. That might be a decent return. But what I can tell you is very few people are planning on that return. They're planning on something at least twice that.
Oh, it's more than that. I've seen polling that people expect like 15, 20% compounded annual returns in tech stocks still.
And this is why this is a market top. Because at the top, the market as measured by price or as measured by valuation reaches a maximum optimism is what you would call it, at precisely the moment when the justification for optimism is zero.
Or it's like Harris Kupperman, hedge fund manager Cuppy. Harris Kupperman says this Project Zimbabwe, you destroy the currency and the stock market, like in Venezuela or Zimbabwe or Argentina, soars in nominal value, but it's not keeping pace with the inflation rate. It's just a disaster. But I think the goal is to inflate home prices. I mean, I don't think anyone's done an accurate study on property taxes. Property taxes are up enormously the last couple decades in many different cities and states all over the country. No one's accounting for like property tax increases on nominal home price gains.
Well, I'll tell you who's monitoring that, and that's the people who own a house.
No, but I'm saying
so
that like Wall Street,
for it.
you don't hear Wall Street analysts saying that like the government, like the property tax receipts are up in this much. I don't see anyone doing studies like this. I mean, here's
an example of how stupid the economics profession is in total. Remember when stagflation appeared in the 70s? It was considered an impossibility. And then all of a sudden it appeared. Everyone, oh my God, I'm so shocked. What is this stagflation? They had to come up with a new word for it. Let me see if I got this right. These guys could not fathom that if because of inflation, you can only buy half of what you could buy before because it costs so goddamn much, that's not also stagnating. The answer, certainly it is.
Well,
when I was 12, 13 years old, I carried golf bags for $2.50 an hour. It came out $10 for a loop. And I was 13. Let's call it 13. Might have been 12, but 13 certainly. And so I was paid. I happen to remember just by chance that at about that same age, I bought an extra large pizza at a real pizzeria, not Papa John's or anything. I think one of the Italian guy behind the thing throwing the pizza in the air, right? A big extra large plain pizza for $2, which means as a 13-year-old, I was paid 1.25 pizzas per hour. That now translated into $20-23. What's an extra large pizza? One of those places. I'm going to guess that's $20-25 an hour.
Pizzas in major cities and metro areas, you're talking $30, $35, $40.
I was in Syracuse, New York. It was probably not that.
Yeah.
So
my dad went to Syracuse. Yeah, Syracuse is a college town, so the prices are going to be a little cheaper.
Well, not just that. Syracuse is bigger than a college. Ithaca's a college town. But the point being is that I was making so much money as measured by purchasing power that you can't do it now. Now, for a kid that age to make that kind of money, he would have to be doing tricks for people behind the dumpster at Wendy's. And you know, guys who are trying to feed a family can't make that kind of money now. A lot of them. Northeast pizza. I'm going to find out what a pizza costs.
In New York City,
And
a large cheese pizza, very expensive in New York City, DC metro area, large cheese pizza, very expensive now. I think it's over $30 at a lot of places. In New York
well,
City.
I'm gonna tell you in Syracuse what it is, in Ithaca what it is. So an extra large pizza right now, no extra shit, no anything, $20. So it costs 1/10 what it costs now. So that tells you. And by the way, pizza's pizza. So in that sense, it tells you what inflation was. That's like the Big Mac index. And it just, I was paid $2.50 an hour. Now minimum wage was, I think, $1.65 or $1.50 or something. So it was well over minimum wage is the problem. But so I wrote this up and sent it off to a friend. Late at night, I used to chat with a woman who was nobody. She's a Harvard professor, and we would just swap emails back and forth. I've got quite a few dozen. And I wrote about that. She said, "Can I put that in my blog?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I let her put it in her blog. I wrote a couple more blogs for her. That turned out to be Elizabeth Warren. I did not know who I was talking to at the time. She was just a chick. And she was also a decent person at the time, or I misread her. I don't know which. I don't know if she got corrupted or what, but she seems less decent to me now. So in any event, the point being is,
she's anti-Bitcoin and in bed with the banks now, seems.
Maybe. She still seems to be anti-bank, though. I would have been fine with Elizabeth being elected president. Elizabeth Warren versus Biden? Holy shit, there's no comparison. I think that there's probably 200 million people in this country more qualified than Biden to be president. So my opinion of Biden couldn't be lower. I could find people inside federal prisons who are more qualified than Biden. I'd swap them. So that's where we're at now. We have a political system that is completely bankrupt, mentally, morally bankrupt. And I don't see, at one point the Fed in like 08, 09 was talking about how they need the government to do fiscal policy to help. Whatever that means. I don't even know what that means.
They always say that, well, they want the government to cut spending. When they say fiscal, they want the government to raise taxes,
I think in 08, 09, cut spending. In 08, 09, they were asking for them to spend. They wanted shovel-ready shit is what I think they were pushing
I thought
for.
like Greenspan, Bernanke, they're always like, the Congress needs to be more fiscally responsible. They need to raise taxes and cut spending and balance the budget.
I think they were asking for Congress to do the spending so they didn't have to do shit. And I could be wrong on that, though. But the point being is right now, Powell has got to be looking at the government going, look, guys, we're trying to wrestle this python under control and you're not helping. You just sent $200 billion to Ukraine or $120 billion or some big number, whatever. We're trying to get this under control and you guys are completely loose cannons. So people say, oh, Powell's a political animal. I don't think Powell has a shred of allegiance to Biden.
Oh, definitely not.
I think Powell will do what Powell thinks he ought to do. Now, he might not want to be the guy who crashed the system, so he might turn into a spineless wimp like seems to happen. But I think it's still possible, despite recent rhetoric, it's still possible that the rhetoric was the bullshit and that he intends to inflict pain. And I think while the speculative juices on Wall Street are still flowing, he will not wimp out. I think he's got to pop the equity bubble.
If I was him, I wouldn't want that job. I mean, I'd want to get out before the market crashed and things got worse. I'm shocked he's still there.
I'm shocked anyone wants that job. Brainerd wanted it. That's a funny ass story.
Well, I mean, she could get away probably because she's in the right political and probably has friends in the White House and like Department of Justice. She could probably get away with a bunch of extra insider trading if she wanted, if she was the head of the Fed.
Well, what she tried to, and I think that's all power. I don't think they're in there for the money. I think they're in there to be kings and queens of the universe. I think money gets overstated as a motivating force. You reach some point where that's not it. I think it's about power.
It's both. I mean, once they get to a certain amount of money, I guess like a lot of them don't necessarily get up to like the Jerome Powell level where they're worth over $100 million, but they want to get to tens of millions of dollars. Once you get to the DC Metro, you get to, I don't know, 20, 30 million around here. It's very comfortable living.
I I think power is more important than money. I think I think powers would generate serotonin, dopamine, things like that. And so the funny story was that I was at a dinner one night with I think George Gammon might have been there. Brent Johnson, maybe, Adrian Day, a couple others, and Danielle DiMartino Booth was late, and she had just gotten off the phone with Richard Fisher, and she had a hot news flash. It turns out that remember when the Fed guys resigned because they were day trading? Remember
Yes.
when the Fed, a couple of Fed governors? Turns out Brainerd threw them under the bus. Brainerd sabotaged them. That was the story. But here's what happened. So Brainerd ratted them out to the Financial Times. The Financial Times then figured out that Brainerd was the one who signed their conflict of interest form and started going at her. And she said, "Back away from me and I'll give you a bigger fish." And she threw Powell under the bus for the corporate bonds that he fucked around with.
The other Fed governors too. Well, some of the other Fed governors made tens of millions of dollars. They didn't go to prison. Well, they just resigned.
Yeah, that's right. No, the hypocrisy is just legendary. But I think that's always been true. Probably a lot of Roman senators didn't get thrown in prison either.
Well, there was no media coverage. There was no media coverage like there is. There was no radio or television or internet journalism. There was none of that back then. I mean, now like you can release a story in 24 hours. It can be all over the internet. Less than 24 hours. It can be all over the internet now. Corruption.
But they just blow it off now. See, this is what bothers me so much is they just say, this is what Clinton taught us. Just don't fold your hand. Just say I didn't have sex with that woman. Just keep saying it. There is no laptop. Just keep saying it. And so Clinton brought in the lie no matter what, doesn't matter, wait, batten down the hatches, it will all just go away. Remember when Gary Hart got knocked out of the presidential race because there's a picture of him and Donna, what's her name, sitting on a boat called Monkey Business? That was a setup, by the way.
That was a little before my time. That was a little, but well, yeah, there was
Roger Stone propped that one up. And he left the presidential race. That wouldn't get 20 minutes of coverage now.
I mean, if you're on the correct side of the mainstream media and they're backing you and they're covering for you, then yeah, you can get away with all that stuff. If you're on the other side, so if you're Trump or Ron Paul, they're going after you.
Right.
Rand Paul, they're going to, I mean, like there was people on the mainstream media that were honestly hoping that Rand Paul died in that attack there when he was attacked by his neighbor.
No question. I wish I knew who were the really sincerely. I can't even name someone who I could let's say when Trump was president. I can't name for you someone who was truly in his camp. There's a whole bunch of guys who tied their wagon to him, said, look, I'm not tying my wagon to Trump. I'm tying my wagon to the MAGA voters, which looks like a big noisy bunch. I don't think I could name a single person I could say, bet my life that person supports Trump.
There's a couple people on Fox News, maybe, but I mean, like they also like ruined it because they kept repeating many times per day that Hillary Clinton, they had tons of evidence and Hillary Clinton was getting locked up, which was, I thought that was ridiculous. No one was going to put her in prison.
But they did have tons of evidence.
There's tons of it. Look, Dave, there are tons of evidence on lots of people. They have blackmail control files on everyone. It's mutually assured destruction, so they're not going to go to prison.
That's right. So bottom line is we are getting duped. But now we're facing some very grave issues, which my pulse is back down, thankfully. That way I won't have a heart attack. But we face grave issues. And I don't see any evidence that anyone in power has the backbone to solve them, to solve the problems.
I completely agree. If anything, the opposite. They're doing the opposite, man. They're stealing everything they can as Rome burns. So while the
and that's why
playing,
I'm studying a topic that I've talked to you beforehand, but won't talk to you on air because I don't want you to get booted off YouTube. But I'm studying a subject which I think explains why they are completely captured. You can mention it if you want. I'm not going to mention it.
Well, we had Madison.
Let me put it this way. It's not just Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein's a tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg.
Well,
it goes way deeper than Epstein. Way deeper than Epstein.
The lobbyists, the politicians, the high-level bureaucrats. I mean, when their ties are unbuttoned and when they're at the charity events and they're drinking and doing drugs and stuff like that, and they're not on TV, or even the cable journalists like on CNN and Fox, some of them go to the same parties. They do drink the same drinks, do the same drugs, bang the same hookers. So, I mean, like, it's Jesse Ventura said it best, honestly. He said basically it's professional wrestling. So when you're on TV,
I'm not talking drugs and hookers. I'm talking 5-year-olds.
Let's not go into depth on that. I'm
happy to stop right there. What I don't want you to do is sanitize it by saying drugs and hookers. You can just not say anything. That's fine. I just want to make it clear.
Most of them are into drugs and hookers and other dirty stuff that's borderline illegal. But yes, there is a lot of that other stuff too. And
no one cares about drugs and hookers. No one cares about drugs and hookers. So does it shock anyone? No. That's why we've been desensitized. So now they're owned. They are owned by more dramatic things. So look, my wife's home. She's starving to death.
Okay.
So I'm going to let you go. And I apologize for getting so irritated. Not at you, but at the issues, because it really does look hopeless to me. And I have been struggling with how to cope with this. So I feel like, weak metaphor, but I feel like some German Jew in 1935 sitting around the dining room table saying to my family, look, guys, we got to get out of here. And they're saying, no, this will pass. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I've had
one satisfying. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've had other Americans say the same stuff, and then they're like, where should I move to? And I'm like, well, I don't know what's better. I mean, there's a lot of problems everywhere. So, I mean, I guess you got to diversify. And if you have the money to do so, I guess you can move around a little bit. You can live part of the year in one country or another. I don't think any country is good right now. I think they're all corrupt.
I wouldn't intend to move out of the country. What I might consider doing is moving to some absolutely rural setting where there was no one within 100 miles with a Hillary Clinton sign on their front yard, or a Joe Biden sign.
Well, I want to just thank you so much for your time today, David, for our discussion. I've known you for over a decade. We actually didn't get a chance to discuss like the healthcare corruption that you have in your report, and there's a ton of it. I mean, I've been dealing with this stuff too. The healthcare industry, big pharma, the doctor's visits, healthcare insurance, it's so bloated, corrupt, and wasteful. I'm paying hundreds of dollars now for under 5 minutes with a doctor. I feel like I'm just getting ripped off nonstop. The system is just so bloated and corrupt and wasteful at this point. We need something better.
Right. I agree. My wife has profound health problems. She's had 60 surgeries. Here's a stat for you. Before we go, I'll give you one stat. She must have broken a record with this. She broke her neck for the second time a year ago, December 5th. She broke her neck for the third time a year ago, December 8th. Different break, 3 days apart. I know the healthcare system, and you're right. It is all screwed up.
My dad's a retired doctor. It's gotten so bad in the last like 10, 15 years. So bad compared to how it was even like 15 or 20 years ago.
Right. I wouldn't want to be a doctor. I was going to go to med school and decided not to at the last minute. I'll let you go. Thank you for inviting me. If people want to find me, I don't know why you would after that podcast, but if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter, David B. Collum. My write-up is my pinned tweet. Otherwise, you can email me if you want. Don't send hate mail, just delete it. You're welcome to disagree. That's not hate mail, that's disagreeing. I don't get hate mail. I had one guy who sent me hate mail, and I highlighted him in my write-up the next year, see if I could shame the bastard. If you have some facts on things I said, like something I got wrong, please send them to me. I am open-minded to correcting my views.